Today we're going to talk about after treatment and dosing fuel to it. Quickly, I want to do a little review when it comes to Cummins. In 2007, they released their first mid-range and heavy-duty engine to have after treatment, and it was just a DPF filter, the diesel particulate filter, that caught the soot or smoke and then turned that into a gas heat in a gas. So the ISC already had electronically fired injectors, the mid-range, but the heavy-duty ISX, which was a carryover from the 870, just became the 871. It still had electronic controls of fueling and timing, but it had mechanical injectors, not electronically fired. In 2010, the ISX platform moved up from 871 to 2250, and we now have electronically fired injectors. But we still have dosing done on a number 7 injector, some people call it, that's bolted right behind the exit of the turbo turbine housing. It's usually bolted on a little cast iron manifold. That's a Cummins part. And that would dose, the ECM would use that to dose fuel back to the after treatment to make heat for either a passive, in some cases, or a after treatment stationary regen initiated by software such as Insight. And this continued on until about 2017 or 18 when they came out with the X15. And the very first X15s did have the injector, number 7 injector bolted on the back, but then the later X15s, I'm going to say around 2019 or 20, we started seeing that injector go away, and they were dosing fuel to the after treatment by firing the 4, 5, and 6 injector on the exhaust stroke. Now, with the mid-range engines, they started doing that in 2007. So when you're firing on the exhaust stroke, you're putting raw fuel into the cylinder, and it's getting pushed into the exhaust and going back to the after treatment. So now, fast forward, we started a new possible problem back in 2007 with the mid-range. And by the way, the B series also dosed the after treatment in the same manner. But we started a new problem where if we had excessive regens, we could have fuel in the oil because we are putting raw fuel in the cylinder, and some of it's going to get by the rings, even though it's a very small amount. Some of it's going to get by the rings, and then it goes into the oil. That normally is not a problem because the system designed to deal with that, and as long as everything's working correctly, you don't have a problem. But let's take a look at a problem that we had just a few weeks ago where I got a phone call, and well, let's take a look. For those of you that know me or follow me, you probably know by now I don't do very much in terms of giving direction to people until I get an ECM image. And sometimes I even ask for more. I ask for data logs. Sometimes it's a data log of a regen that's driven by software. Sometimes it's a data log driving. It just depends on the problem I'm trying to help them with. And many years ago, I knew a guy who was a financial analyst for a big bank. And I told him, how can you do that job? It seems almost impossible to figure out the future. And he said, it's all about data and trends. And he said, the more data I have, the better job I do. So I kind of remembered that. And so I asked for data, even though it's not the kind he wanted. I request data. But anyway, so I got my image, and one of the first things I do when I get it is I go look at the audit trail. And the audit trail tells you, if you're using Insight, the audit trail tells you what the people before you have done and when they did it. So if you look over on the right, it says time since last access. and it says 64 hours, 292, 294, 626. So in the last 600 hours, they've reset faults at least 3 times. Now that might not seem like a lot, but notice they've done diagnostic tests twice. So there's some kind of a problem going on. And now they reset faults again just 64 hours ago, and then I get a call. We have an engine down here in a service truck that's getting fuel in the oil, and it's getting a little bit worse every time we do an oil sample. And then you always get that question, what do you think could be wrong? So you start asking questions to get as much background as you can, and then once you get that, you give them some direction. So let's move on a little bit farther. So here's the ECM image that I got from them. And remember, this is an ISB 672250, so it doses fuel by firing on the exhaust stroke. And in an automotive engine, if everything's working correctly, we should see a minimum of 35 hours between regens, and possibly as high as 100 to 130, depending on the duty cycle of the engine and the application that it's in. So I want you to digest this, and then next week we're going to come back and go a little bit farther into this and learn a little bit more, and then we'll see what ultimately was the problem. I think you'll be surprised.